inside. So I'm going to do the shoulder of my bodice. Good side with good side. And I will do the same thing with my facing, back and front. So my under collar is cut on the grain, on the bias, and it's in 2 pieces. So I'm going to assemble my center back of the under collar. Okay, so I press open my bodice seam, shoulder seam, and my facing shoulder seam. I also press my center back seam on the under collar, and I'm going to press now 1 centimeter at both ends of the loose part of the collar. This is going to be a reference for the sewing later on, how to place it and where to start my seam. So under collar, and I will. So the next step is going to assemble the neckline on the bodice. So this is my bodice. I'm going to go and sew the neckline, the under collar neckline on my bodice, and the pressing that I did is going to tell me exactly, this is the notch, so at 1 centimeter down, it's going to tell me exactly where to start my seam. When I sew, I'll open it, and I'm going to start right at the fold line and sew all around till the other side. So the 1 centimeter folding was just for a reference. So I'm going to open it now and start my sewing exactly at the crease. I need to back tack, so I count my stitch going front and back. And I'm gonna assemble respecting my seam allowance. Matching the shoulder notch, making sure that your seam is open. And to finish, with the little reference at my seam allowance intersection. So you have the notch, you need the point at 1 centimeter, and you're going to bring your fold exactly at this point. Like that. Keep it open and assemble. Until the crease. If you need the half stitch, you do your half stitch and you back tack. So the idea is to do exactly the same thing with your facing and top collar, and then okay, so now I'm going to press my neckline seam open. So you should do it in 3 sections. Front, and then you move it and you do your back. So you cannot have everything flat in the same time. If your neckline is a little too curved, you might have to notch a bit the bottom part only, like this, to help you keeping your seam down, even the front sometimes, but we try to keep it as flat as we can to avoid that problem. So the back, and then the front again. Okay, so I have my facing on the machine. I'm going to place my bodice collar over the collar, right side on the right side, and I'm going to assemble the fall of the collar. My current seam allowance is 1 centimeter, so side to side. Now when it's done, I have my bodice on top, so I'm just going to flip it and understitch on the under collar, so the bodice side. I'm going to do my understitch at 1 millimeter with the seam allowance. So 1 millimeter on the under collar. Okay, so when your top collar is done, the top part or the fall of the collar, you're going to do twice the same thing. You're going to assemble the facing with the bodice. So right side with right side. You're going to assemble the lapel of your facing and bodice together. Matching at the breaking point notch. And you repeat for the other side. Then you're going to open it, send the seam allowance towards the facing for the beginning, and from the breaking point you're going to shift the seam allowance and the understitch towards the bodice. So that's my facing side. I'm starting seam allowance on the facing side. Understitch. I'm going to go check where is my breaking point. You could put a little pin for reference, because from that point you have to shift the seam allowance and send it towards the bodice, so the other way around. And sew all the way up at 1 millimeter also. Is only the notch left to do, only the notch collar to do, close. So you're going to go from the inside again, so right side with right side, and you're going to close top and facing one at the time. So I'm folding the seam allowance of the collar. See, these are my collar piece. So you fold the seam allowance the side you did your top stitch, so you just let it go, the side you fold already, and you're going to stitch until where you stop when you did your neckline, so exactly at 1 centimeter. I'm going to stitch. That's one of the most important seam or determinant seam. So you make sure you don't grab any other seam allowance. It's better to do 1 stitch less than 1 stitch too much. So you make sure your seam are not fold, and you could already check to see inside if your point are matching. Here we go. Now you're gonna go stitch until exactly the 1 centimeter and back tack. Now you're going to do that one more time for the facing, to close the top part of the facing. So you let the seam allowance fold on the bodice side this time, and you're going to go assemble or close the last opening until again exactly the same point. You make sure that you don't go over extra seam. It should be only 2 layers of fabric until you see your very last point. That's exactly where you should stop. And backtack. So you could turn it inside out by pushing the seam allowance all in the same direction. With your thumb inside, you hold it and push it outside. Needs a little practice, and you'll make really nice corner without working too hard. So again, seam allowance all same direction. With your thumb inside, and you push it out pretty easily, and you get really sharp, nice corner. Okay, so I just went and pressed a little bit my collar and my lapel, making sure that the understitch doesn't show from the outside. So my outside and my outside. You have to attach your neckline together, because till now it's still open. So you have to attach your necklines together. Don't start exactly at the corner. You could start like 2 centimeters further than the corner. Make sure it's not gonna pull. So you lift the facing or bodice, and you're gonna go grab just 1 layer of each seam allowance. You remember they're open, so only the bottom seam allowance of each seam. So you grab it and you're going to sew it. Again, don't try to go too close to the corner, it's just going to pull. This time you don't have to sew exactly at 1 centimeter. In fact, it might be a little dangerous. So 0.5 or 0.7 should be alright. Okay, whoops. Okay, so I just stopped to change my foot to a much narrower foot. Because sometimes the thickness of the fabric doesn't allow you to stitch where you want exactly. So I'm going to start again, cut those threads later. So this way I'll be able to go stitch much closer. If you don't have the narrow foot, you could use the zipper foot if you're trouble. Like double notch with double notch. So before, when I was pressing, I said you could notch your bottom seam, and I said that you should not notch too much because it makes this seam harder. Et voilà. So I'm going to stop just a little further than the center back and show you the result. So your collar is now attached. It's finished. Here you go. So hope you enjoy, and I see you next time.